My mother was unconscious in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines that were breathing for her, when my brother walked into that room with a notary and a document he had already prepared. She had been unresponsive for 11 days. He found a 20-minute window, the only 20-minute window in 11 days where the doctors believed she had enough awareness to make a legal decision, and he used it to change her will. Every asset. The house she had lived in for 31 years, her savings, everything my father had worked his entire life to leave behind for both of us. Gone, transferred, signed away to one person. I found out the next morning, not from my brother. From a hospital administrator who called to confirm that a notarized document had been witnessed on the premises and asked if I had any questions. I had questions. I had so many questions. But here is the part that my brother did not account for, the part that changed everything, that unraveled every single thing he had so carefully arranged in that 20-minute window. Our mother woke up the next day. Stay with me. Because what she said when she woke up is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life, and what happened after that is something my brother will carry with him too, just for very different reasons. My name is Rachel. I'm going to change certain details throughout this story, not to protect my brother honestly, because I'm well past that, but because some of what happened is still legally sensitive and my attorney has been very clear about what I can and cannot say on the record. Growing up, my brother Daniel and I were close. I want to say that clearly because I think it matters for understanding everything that came after. We were not a family with a long history of conflict. We were not the kind of siblings who had been fighting over our parents' attention since childhood. We had a normal relationship, not perfect, not without friction but genuinely warm. He was 3 years older than me. He taught me how to ride a bike. I proofread his college applications. Our parents had a modest but stable life. Our father worked for 32 years at the same company and retired with a pension and a paid-off house in the suburbs, a house that was worth considerably more than he had paid for it simply because of how the housing market had moved in the decades since he bought it. When he passed away 7 years ago, he left everything to our mother with the understanding, stated clearly in his will, and in conversations both Daniel and I had been part of, that when our mother eventually passed, everything would be divided equally between us. That was the plan. Everyone knew the plan. There was no ambiguity. What I did not know, what I did not even begin to suspect until much later, was that Daniel had decided, somewhere in the years between our father's death and our mother's illness, that equal was not the arrangement he wanted. My mother was diagnosed with a serious cardiac condition 18 months before any of this happened. The diagnosis was frightening but manageable at first: medication, lifestyle adjustments, regular monitoring. She was 71, sharp, independent, and deeply resistant to the idea that her health was going to slow her down. For the first year she was right. She managed it. She kept her garden. She hosted Sunday dinners. She called me every Tuesday evening and my brother every Thursday, and she kept both calls to exactly 45 minutes because she had always believed, as she put it, that a good phone call should leave you wanting more. Then she had a major cardiac event on a Wednesday night in November. A neighbor found her. By the time the ambulance arrived, she had been without oxygen for a period that the doctors were careful not to specify too precisely when they spoke to Daniel and me in the hospital waiting room that first night. She was alive, that was the word they kept using, she was alive. Said in the careful tone that medical professionals use when alive is the most they can honestly promise you. She was placed in the ICU. She was intubated. She was unconscious. Daniel and I sat in that waiting room together for 6 hours that first night. We cried together. We called relatives together. We talked about her stories, memories, the specific way she laughed at her own jokes before she got to the punchline. I believed sitting there that whatever was happening was bringing us closer. I was wrong. He was already thinking about something else entirely. The 11 days my mother spent unconscious were the longest of my life. I was there every day. I took unpaid leave from work. I sat beside her bed and talked to her. The nurses said hearing familiar voices could help, and I believed them, or maybe I just needed to believe them because it gave me something to do with the helplessness. Daniel visited, less than I did, but he came. He asked the right questions to the doctors. He was present in the ways that looked like presence. What I didn't know was that he was also having conversations I wasn't part of. I learned later that Daniel had contacted the hospital's patient services department in the first week to ask about the legal requirements for a patient in my mother's condition to execute or modify a legal document. He had asked about the specific threshold of consciousness required. He had asked what kind of professional witness would be needed. He had asked, in other words, exactly what it would take. The patient services staff, following standard procedure, gave him the information he asked for. There was nothing illegal about the questions. There was nothing that flagged what he was planning. He was patient. He waited. On day 11, my mother showed signs of increased responsiveness. Not full consciousness. She wasn't speaking, wasn't tracking conversation, but her responses to stimuli had improved enough that the attending physician noted it in her chart as a possible early indicator of improved neurological function. Daniel saw that note. I don't know exactly how. Maybe a nurse mentioned it. Maybe he had been asking staff to keep him updated on any changes. Maybe he simply checked the patient portal that we both had access to as next of kin. What I know is what happened next. I had gone home that afternoon for the first time in 4 days. My husband had practically begged me. I hadn't slept in my own bed since she'd been admitted. I was home for 3 hours. I showered. I ate something that wasn't vending machine food. I fell asleep on the couch. While I was asleep, Daniel walked into our mother's hospital room with a notary he had arranged in advance and a document he had already prepared by an attorney. He was in and out in under 20 minutes. The hospital administrator who called me the following morning was doing her job correctly, notifying next of kin that a legal document had been executed on the premises, as per their standard protocol. She had no way of knowing that I had no idea it had happened. I remember I was making coffee when my phone rang. I remember the specific sound of the coffee maker because for a long time after that morning, I couldn't make coffee without my stomach dropping. I asked the administrator to repeat herself. Then I asked her to repeat herself again. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor. I don't fully know why, my legs just went, and I said, "Can you tell me what the document was?" She could not tell me the specifics. But she confirmed that it was a notarized legal document. She confirmed the date and time. She confirmed my brother's name as the person who had arranged it. I called Daniel immediately. He didn't answer. I called 3 more times. Nothing. I was still sitting on my kitchen floor when my phone rang again 40 minutes later. A different number. The ICU nurse. My mother was awake, not partially responsive, not showing improved indicators, awake, speaking. Asking for water and for someone to please turn down the television volume in the hallway. I drove to that hospital so fast I genuinely cannot account for parts of the route. When I walked into her room, she looked at me and said, in a voice that was rough and quiet from 11 days of intubation, "Rachel, you look terrible. Have you been sleeping?" I laughed. I cried. I held her hand for a long time without saying anything. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Her neurological function appeared significantly better than they had dared to hope. And while she had a long recovery ahead of her, the prognosis had shifted in a direction none of us had allowed ourselves to expect. She was going to be okay, and then, about an hour after I arrived, she asked me something. She said, "Did Daniel come in yesterday? I think I remember. I remember someone talking to me. I remember someone putting something in my hand." I went very still. "What do you remember, Mom?" I asked, as carefully as I have ever asked anything. She frowned, the specific frown she made when she was trying to pull something into focus. I don't know, I couldn't really understand what was happening. I remember Daniel's voice. I remember he kept saying, "Just here, Mom, just sign here." I thought I was dreaming. She looked at me then, and something in my face must have told her this wasn't a dream. "Rachel," she said, "what did I sign?" I called an attorney before I called Daniel. I want to be honest about that sequence because I think it was the right call and I would make it again. I called an attorney, explained what had happened in as much detail as I had, and asked what my options were. Her response was immediate and clear. "Do not confront your brother yet. Do not tell him your mother is conscious and has questions about what happened. Get a copy of the document that was executed and bring it to her with legal counsel present." We obtained the document through proper legal channels within 48 hours. My attorney came with me to the hospital. We sat with my mother, who by this point was sitting up in bed, eating solid food, and very fully herself in a way that made what had happened in that room 2 days earlier even more incomprehensible. We read her the document. I watched her face while she read it. Or rather, while my attorney read it to her because her reading glasses were at home and nobody had thought to bring them. When it was finished, my mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, with a steadiness that I found both heartbreaking and magnificent, "I did not understand what I was signing. I was not present in the way that a person needs to be present to make a decision like that. I thought it was a medical form. I thought I was dreaming." She looked at my attorney directly. "What do I need to do to fix this?" What followed was 4 months of legal proceedings that I am going to summarize carefully because some elements remain confidential. My mother, now fully recovered and represented by her own independent attorney, initiated a formal challenge to the document Daniel had executed. The grounds were significant, undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, and procedural irregularities in the notarization process that my attorney identified on close examination of the documentation. Daniel hired his own attorney. He maintained that our mother had been of sufficient mind to execute the document, that he had acted in accordance with her wishes, and that her subsequent recovery did not retroactively invalidate a legally executed instrument. His position was not entirely without legal basis. That is the part of this story I have had to sit with honestly, because the law around testamentary capacity is complicated, and there were arguments available to him that were not frivolous, even if the underlying act was something I found indefensible. What undermined his position was threefold. First, my mother's own testimony. Clear, consistent, and deeply credible, a 71-year-old woman who was fully herself by the time she testified, describing in precise detail the fragmented, dreamlike state she had been in when the document was signed. Second, the medical records. The attending physician's notes from that day, when read in full context, painted a picture of a patient whose improved responsiveness was being measured in neurological reflexes, not in the kind of cognitive clarity required to understand and execute a legal document altering the disposition of an entire estate. Third, and this is the part that Daniel had not anticipated, hospital security footage, not of the room itself, which had no camera, but of the hallway outside, which showed the timestamp of his arrival and departure, the presence of a third individual who was later confirmed to be the notary, and critically, a separate individual who left shortly before Daniel arrived, and whose identity and conversation with Daniel in the hallway became a significant point of inquiry. I cannot share more than that, but I can tell you that what the full record showed was enough. The document was invalidated, not through a dramatic courtroom verdict, through a mediated settlement process that my attorney had pushed for because, as she said, "Your mother is recovering from a serious cardiac event. The last thing her heart needs is a trial." She was right. We settled. The terms included the complete invalidation of the document Daniel had executed, the restoration of my parents' original estate plan, and certain other provisions that I am not able to discuss. Daniel and I have not spoken since the settlement was finalized. That is a loss I carry differently than I expected to, not with the burning anger of the early months, but with something quieter and heavier. The grief of understanding that the brother who taught me to ride a bike, and whose college applications I proofread, was also capable of walking into a hospital room with a notary while our mother was unconscious. I don't know how to reconcile those two things. I'm not sure I ever fully will. My mother, for her part, recovered more completely than any of her doctors had dared to predict. She is home. She is in her garden. She calls me every Tuesday evening, and the calls still run exactly 45 minutes, because she has always believed that a good phone call should leave you wanting more. She does not talk about Daniel often. When she does, there is something in her face that I recognize, the look of someone who loves a person and has accepted with tremendous sadness that love is not always enough to make someone behave with decency. I have thought for a long time about what to say in this part of the video, because I don't want to wrap this story in a bow that it doesn't deserve. The truth is that grief and money together do something to people that I don't think any of us fully understands until we're inside it. I'm not excusing what Daniel did. I want to be clear about that. What he did was a profound betrayal of our mother, of our father's memory, and of every year we spent being a family. But I also think that the anticipation of loss, the particular terror of watching a parent die, can reveal things in people that were always there, buried, waiting for enough pressure to surface. Daniel's actions revealed something about him I hadn't seen. I don't know if he became that person in the years after our father died, or if he had always been capable of it and I simply hadn't known. What I know is this. Document everything. If a parent is seriously ill and there are assets involved, consult an estate attorney before a crisis happens, not during one. Understand what the laws in your state say about testamentary capacity, about undue influence, about the rights of beneficiaries to challenge documents executed under questionable circumstances. And if you are sitting in a hospital right now watching someone you love fight for their life, please know that the legal protections exist. They are not always easy to access. They are not always fast, but they exist. My mother's signature on that document was not her voice. Her voice was what she said when she woke up, fully herself, and asked what she had signed. That was her voice, and it was enough. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced something like this in your own family, or if you're navigating something like this right now, please leave a comment below. This topic gets talked about less than it should, and I think there are more people going through it quietly than most of us realize. If this video helped you or someone you know in any way, please share it. You never know who in your circle might need to hear it. And next week, I'm sharing the story of a woman who discovered, after 20 years of marriage, that her husband had been hiding an entire financial life from her, and the single document she found that changed everything. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Thank you for watching all the way through. It means more than you know. I'll see you in the next one.